Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred. And today I'm going to tell you about a really great unblending technique called perspective swap. And of course, I'm going to give you a wonderful example from Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. But before I tell you the example, I just want to explain what the technique is. So it's called perspective swap. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, let's play from the current slide. So perspective swap, the self sees through the eyes of a blended part and mirrors back what they see. And then the self invites the part to see through the self's eyes. So this can be actually really powerful. This is called conscious blending. When the self says, I really want to get it. It could be an exile or it could be a protective part, but let me see how you see things through your eyes. And let me mirror it back to you, reflect it back to you, and see if I really get your experience. And then the self can offer or invite the part to see through the self's eyes, because the part's perspective is usually very, very narrow, focused on one little thing, and it has like one piece of the puzzle, whereas the self has this really wide 30,000 foot view of the whole picture. And so it can say, hey, come fly up here with me and see from my perspective for a moment, if the part is willing. You can also ask this great question of a part: when you look at me, who do you see? This was something that Mike Elkin contributed to IFS that has been really powerful in my own experience, to see who the part sees in the seat of self, and then ask any blended parts just to sit next to the self. So you might be asking a big protector, who do you see when you look at me? And they say, a little child. And usually that means that it's the part that they protect, that they're so focused on. That's who they see you as. So another question that's common in IFS is, how old do you think I am? And if the part will just give a number, it's so funny, parts will say adamantly, you're 3. Duh, they really, really believe that. And that's what they see. Or they might say something like, I see a part who hates me. Right. And that's usually indication that you might be blended with a part that is polarized with them. So again, you can ask those parts if they will step to the side of you or just stand next to you, and then keep saying, and now who do you see? And the parts will tell you who's blended with you, so that you can see if they'll separate, and eventually you can relate to the part from self. You can also invite parts to look in an imaginary mirror to see themselves and self together. Again, this is kind of more for people who are visual inside. But if you are more, sometimes people have this like knowing of the energy of parts, or they feel the parts in their body. You can ask questions related to that, right? Like, what kind of energy do you feel coming from me? And if it's anything but that calm, confident, compassionate, connected energy, that's indication that you're blended with another part. So the law of inner physics here is that the self can choose to consciously blend with parts in order to understand their perspective. And of course, parts can choose to see from other perspectives. Every part has its own will, and the self always respects every part's will and never overrides it or steamrolls over them or forces them, coerces them in any way. Okay, so here is a wonderful example with Martha Sweezy's client, Arlo, and she calls this Arlo's avatar owns up. So Arlo, a 45-year-old cisgender heterosexual English Canadian man, was molested by a Catholic priest as a child. Although he speaks of having compassion for his parts, he is still stalled in therapy. So in this session, Martha concludes that a self-like manager, or what she calls an avatar part, is blended, and so she addresses it directly. Martha says, I have the impression that a part may be standing in for you much of the time when we're in therapy. And Arlo says, why do you think that? Martha says, because of how other parts respond. When you say you have compassion, they act as if you're trying to boss them around. This is actually a really great example because I had someone in my IFS consultation group ask this recently. What do you do when a person is telling you that they're in self in regard to their parts, but you really get the sense that they're not? First, you, as the practitioner, you need to ask yourself, what is the evidence for me that they're not in self? Because the person and their parts will probably ask you that, right? Why? Why do you think that? So Martha was able to back that up. The evidence is that while you're saying you're in self, the other parts are responding to something else, right? They're acting as if they're being bossed around. And so Arlo says, you mean I'm not me? And Martha makes the note that she thinks the self-like part is blended with Arlo in this moment and speaking directly here. So she says, so she's doing direct access with the self-like part. She says, you're a really important part of Arlo, but there's also an Arlo who is not a part that could help out. I know that you work really hard for Arlo, and it must be challenging when other parts, like the one who looks at porn, are not cooperative. Arlo's avatar responds, I have compassion for that boy, but porn is a disgusting habit and it has to stop. So again, you can hear that this is not self, right? The self would never say to a part, you know, you're disgusting, or be forceful in making it stop, do or not do anything. So Arlo's referring to the exile when he says that boy, who actually turns his back when the self-like manager tries to make contact. Ah, okay. So when Arlo, who believes he's in self, right, is going toward the exile turns away. So that's how the other parts react is a really big indicator of whether the person is in self or not. Sometimes they just don't know who it is and you need to update them. But if the person's in self, they'll be very patient, very understanding. They'll be okay with parts turning away from them or not talking to them. So it's kind of clear that this is a self-like part, a managing part. So Martha says, I know you feel that way, and I also know that the porn part has its reasons. But what if Arlo could mediate your disagreement with the porn part? And so Arlo's avatar says, who are you talking about? And the therapist says, how old do you think Arlo is? And then Arlo speaks and says, he thinks I'm 9 years old. So this is the first time that Arlo is speaking about the self-like manager. So this is, again, this is an indication that Arlo has been able to unblend just a little bit to say he's recognizing, oh, this is a part. This isn't me. This is a manager that's trying to manage the porn part because it's seeing harm there and wants what's best for Arlo, but is not the self. So Martha says, what do you say to him? Right? Because he said he thinks he's 9. And Arlo updates him and says, I'm a grown-up. And then he pauses and says, he's looking at me. And Martha says, how do you feel toward him? Again, assessing for Arlo's self-energy, because this could be another part that's relating to the self-like manager. As she says, this is the Geiger counter question to facilitate the relationship between Arlo's self and his self-like manager. So Arlo says, I would like to get to know him. Sounds self-like to me. And Martha says, how does he respond? Arlo's avatar says, I am Arlo. I take care of him. What would he be without me? Very, very common for especially these managers that are used to being at the forefront. They're used to blending with us or our clients and really running our lives. And they feel like I am working so hard all the time. They don't want to be dismissed, right? As this, oh, it's just this part, right? They really need to be recognized. But Martha points out it's interesting that the part claims to be Arlo, but also describes what he does for Arlo. So there is a little separation there. So Martha's checking back for Arlo's self and says, "Are you there, Arlo?" Arlo says, "Yes." And the therapist says, and Martha says, "What do you say to him?" Arlo says, "I'm asking him and the boy to look in the mirror with me." And then there's a pause where Arlo goes inside, and then he says, he sees all three of us. So I don't know if Arlo just decided to do this, or maybe this is a technique that Martha taught him. But this is a great kind of perspective swap technique, right? If you're visual on the inside, right, let's all look in the mirror, and then you can see clearly the number of parts that are present in that moment. And the therapist asked, how old is he, the self-like part? Arlo said, "He's 19. He knows that he got me out of there, and I know it too, and I'm grateful." Sounds like self to me. The self is just so respectful and appreciative of these hardworking manager parts. So Martha says, "Now it could be his turn. Would he like your help?" So Martha's turning the tables and suggesting that Arlo's self can now help the manager, because that's what happens is the parts that take on these roles, they come in to try to support the exiles, really, and to try to keep the system running in the best way they know how. But the self offers, "I can come and help you now. You've been helping for so long. Can I help you? And you can rest." And then once they're unburdened, they actually become very supportive of the self. So it really is this very symbiotic relationship. So the response, Arlo says, he wants to know what will happen to him. He doesn't want to disappear. Very common concern of especially these protective parts that are just working so hard. They don't want to be, they think they'll disappear if they stop working, which is not true. So Martha says he won't. He'll always be an important part of you. What would you like to do once you help the boy? And she's asking the part. And Arlo says he likes what he does. And again, Martha is trying to facilitate insight. She wants the relationship to be between Arlo's self and this part. So she says, "What do you say to him?" And Arlo says, "You can help me out then, right? Like, you can support me. That's okay. We can be a team." And the therapist says, Martha says, what does he need to hear from you? Arlo says, "I wouldn't be alive without him." Again, he needs appreciation. And then there's a pause, and Arlo says, he likes hearing that. These hardworking parts love to be appreciated and really seen for how much they've done for us. So Martha says, "Would he like to look at the boy through your eyes?" Again, a perspective swap here, and Arlo nods. She says, "What is that like for him?" So usually the protector is looking at this exile in a certain way. Like, let's say the exile feels unlovable. Usually the protector actually agrees. They think he is unlovable, or he's shameful, or, so all I can do is try to push him down. So he's saying, Martha's offering, what if this protector looked through the self's eyes? Because the self, I guarantee you, will naturally feel that this exile is beloved, is beautiful, is good, they're delighted in this exile. So she says, what's it like for him to see through yourself's eyes? And Arlo says he's surprised. And the therapist says, how does the boy respond? Arlo says he has turned around now. He's saying, thank you. I don't need your help anymore, to the self-like manager. And he wants to stay with me. Martha says, are you okay with that? Arlo says, yes. And Martha says, how does the 19-year-old, the self-like part, respond to that? And Arlo says, he's sad. He didn't mean to do any harm. Yeah, yeah. Again, the self will have deep compassion on this, right? That these parts were just doing the best they could. They had such good intentions. They didn't realize they were doing harm. And so really what Martha's doing is facilitating Arlo's self in mediating between this protective part and the young boy, the exile boy. So Martha says, does the boy understand, right, that the 19-year-old didn't mean harm? And Arlo says, yes, he just doesn't want to be told what to do anymore. And Martha says, so what needs to happen? And Arlo says, you know, I have room for everyone. Sounds like self. Self is all and. There's enough room for me to hold all of you, and you can all be yourselves. There is freedom in the self. And Martha says, would the boy like your help now? Arlo nods. And again, she says, how do you feel toward him, to make sure that he's in self? But this interaction illustrates how we can help parts swap or share perspectives. There are lots of other options, Martha says. We can, for example, invite the client to externalize parts into objects, like figures, stuffed animals, pillows, scarves, paper plates with drawings on them, etc. Yeah, externalizing parts is a wonderful way to unblend. And then see from the object or part's perspective, and then switch to see the part through the eyes of the self. She also mentions the Gestalt technique, which is where you basically have several different chairs, and you imagine that the different parts are sitting in different chairs, and you can actually go physically to each chair and try to see from that part's perspective. Like, okay, now I'm this self-like managing part that is upset with the pornography part. How am I feeling from this perspective? Now I'm the little boy who's being told what to do all the time and is turning his back. How do I feel from this perspective? And it really helps understand and hold them all at once. So externalizing, moving around in that way can also be a really wonderful way to unblend from parts and to really get their each unique individual experiences. So let me know what you think about this technique and this example in the comments. And if you have any questions, you can send those too.